In gambling, one choice can make you or break you. Just like placing that all-in bet, life sometimes puts you on the spot, and how you respond decides everything. Today's story is a gamble you'll never forget. Everybody in the park froze. The woman's words cut through the summer air like a knife. She pointed at a young black man standing near the food trucks and yelled, "Go back to Africa!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. A couple holding ice cream cones stopped mid-bite. Teenagers dropped their basketball and stared. Parents pulled their children closer, whispering to them not to look. It wasn't just the words she said, it was how she said them, loud, angry, and full of hate, as if she had the right to decide who belonged and who didn't. The young man's name was Marcus. He was tall, well-dressed, and had simply been enjoying the afternoon like everyone else. He hadn't caused a scene. He hadn't said a word. He was just waiting for his food when suddenly, out of nowhere, he became the target of cruelty. For a moment, Marcus said nothing. His silence unsettled the crowd. Everyone watching imagined what they might have done in his place. Some expected him to explode with anger. Others thought he would hang his head and walk away. But Marcus didn't do either. He stood calmly, almost too calmly, as the woman's rage built like a storm. She wasn't finished. Her face burned red, her fists clenched at her sides as she crossed her arms and shouted louder, making sure everyone in the park could hear. "People like you don't belong here. This is our country. You need to go back to where you came from." The words hung in the air like poison. The silence afterward was unbearable. By now, a crowd had gathered. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes locked on Marcus, waiting to see how he would respond. A few people looked uncomfortable, wishing the scene would end. Others seemed eager, almost hungry for drama. Marcus finally shifted. He inhaled deeply, then let out a steady breath. He didn't look angry. He didn't look afraid. He lifted. His head straightened his shoulders and met the woman's eyes. His calmness was so unexpected it stunned everyone. When he finally spoke, his voice was clear and even. "Ma'am," he said, "I was born 3 blocks from here. I've lived in this city my entire life. My family has been in this country for generations, longer than some people standing here today." A ripple of agreement passed through the crowd. A few nodded. Someone muttered, "Good for him." But the woman wasn't satisfied. She rolled her eyes and barked back, "I don't care. You don't look American. You'll never be American." Marcus smiled, not a mocking smile, but one filled with quiet confidence. "That's interesting," he said, "because not only am I American, I've probably done more for this country than you'll ever realize." Now the crowd was paying close attention. The tension had shifted. For the first time, the woman looked small, her fury shrinking against his calm strength. Someone whispered, "Who is he?" Marcus raised his voice slightly so everyone could hear. "I'm a decorated veteran," he said firmly. "I served 2 tours overseas. I wore this country's uniform. I risked my life so that people, even people like you, could stand here today and speak freely. I fought for this land, and I'd do it again, because this is my home." The park erupted in murmurs. Several people clapped. An older man in the back, wearing a veteran's cap, lifted his hand in salute. The energy shifted completely. Marcus's voice grew stronger. "You tell me to go back to Africa, but when this country needed me, I didn't run. I didn't hide. I stood up. I fought. My ancestors built this land with their sweat and their blood, long before you ever stood in this park. So if anyone here should be questioned about loyalty, it's not me. It's the person trying to divide it." For a moment, the woman just stood there, speechless. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The crowd's applause drowned her out. Some people shouted, "Thank you for your service." Others stepped forward to shake Marcus's hand. The woman's face turned pale. Realizing no one was on her side, she turned and stormed away, her anger replaced with shame. Marcus didn't chase after her. He didn't insult her. He simply stood tall, letting the truth speak louder than hate. And as the crowd cheered for him, people knew they had witnessed something powerful. That day, Marcus didn't just defend himself. He reminded everyone watching that strength isn't always about shouting louder. It's about standing firm, speaking truth, and leaving ignorance. With nothing but silence, Marcus's voice was calm, so calm it made the woman's rage look even more foolish. The steadiness of his tone contrasted sharply with her shrill anger, and the crowd could feel the shift immediately. People stopped shuffling. Children who had been distracted by their ice cream cones now turned curious eyes toward him. The air felt heavy, like everyone knew something important was about to happen. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the tense silence. "I was born 3 blocks from here. I've lived in this city my whole life. My family has been in this country for generations, longer than some people standing here." The words weren't loud, but they carried a weight that silence alone could not. Several people in the crowd nodded quietly, almost in relief that he had finally spoken. A woman holding her toddler murmured to her friend, "He's right." Others glanced around uncomfortably, as if realizing how wrong it was to have let the woman's hate go unchallenged. But the woman wasn't ready to back down. She rolled her eyes dramatically and snapped, "I don't care. You don't look American. You'll never be American." Her voice was sharp and bitter, and though she spoke confidently, there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't shrink away or let anger break through his calm. Instead, he smiled, a calm, confident smile that seemed to stop the woman in her tracks. The crowd noticed it too. It wasn't arrogance. It was quiet power. "You know," Marcus said, leaning slightly forward so his voice reached everyone around them, "that's interesting, because not only am I American, but I've probably done more for this country than you'll ever realize." The park grew even quieter. It was no longer Marcus on the defensive. His words had flipped the balance. Now the woman was the one. Standing on shaky ground, her insults suddenly sounding smaller, weaker. People leaned in, their curiosity pulling them closer. Parents stopped ushering their kids away. Teens who had been recording on their phones steadied their cameras. Someone in the back whispered, "Who is he?" The question rippled through the crowd, spreading like a wave of anticipation. Marcus's answer was about to stun them all. Straightened his posture, his expression calm but commanding. His eyes scanned the faces of the crowd before settling back on the woman. When he spoke again, his words were steady but firm, each one striking like a hammer on steel. "I'm a decorated veteran," he said. "I served 2 tours overseas. I wore this country's uniform. I risked my life so that people, even people like you, could stand here today and speak freely." The crowd reacted immediately. Gasps, murmurs, and even a few claps filled the air. An older man in the crowd, wearing a baseball cap stitched with the word veteran, raised his hand in salute. Another woman covered her mouth, whispering, "Oh my God!" But Marcus wasn't finished. He took a step forward, not aggressive, but steady, his voice rising with conviction. "I fought for this land," he said, his eyes locked on the woman's. "I bled for this land. And I'd do it again, because this is my home. My ancestors built this country with their sweat and their blood long before you ever stood in this park. So when you tell me to go back to Africa, understand something. I never left. My family has been here. We are a part of this nation's history, and no amount of hate will erase that." The applause grew louder this time. People clapped, cheered, even shouted words of encouragement. A man called out, "Thank you for your service," a woman shouted. "That's what being American looks like." The energy of the crowd shifted entirely. What had once been tense and uncertain was now unified and strong. The woman's face turned pale. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Her earlier confidence had evaporated under the weight of Marcus's truth. She tried again, stuttering, I didn't mean it like that." But her words were drowned out by the growing cheer around Marcus. She looked around desperately, hoping someone might come to her defense. But no one did. Not a single person in the park sided with her. For the first time, she seemed small, almost embarrassed, her voice swallowed up by the power of Marcus's calm dignity. Finally, with her head down and her shoulders slumped, she turned and walked away. The crowd didn't jeer. They didn't need to. Her shame followed her with every step until she disappeared down the path. Marcus didn't chase her. He didn't gloat. He simply stood tall, letting the truth echo longer than hate ever could. People approached him, shaking his hand, thanking him, admiring the way he had handled the situation. Parents pointed him out to their children, whispering, "That's what real strength looks like." And in that moment, Marcus wasn't just a man waiting for food. He was a living example of what it meant to meet hate with courage, to silence, ignorance not with anger, but with truth. The crowd would never forget what they had witnessed that day, because sometimes the strongest response isn't yelling back. It's standing tall, speaking truth, and leaving hate with nothing but silence. Marcus raised his voice so everyone could hear. His tone was steady, clear, and filled with a quiet authority that made the woman's anger look even smaller than before. "I'm a decorated veteran," he declared, his words ringing out across the park. "I served 2 tours overseas for this country. I wore the uniform so that people, even people like you, could stand here today and speak freely. I risked my life so you could live yours in peace." The effect was immediate. The crowd, which had been holding its breath, erupted into murmurs. People turned to one another, whispering in disbelief. A middle-aged man near the food truck clapped first, and within seconds, others followed. A veteran standing at the back, his hat embroidered with medals, stood tall and saluted Marcus with pride. The woman who had shouted so confidently just moments earlier faltered. Her face lost its color. She had expected him to back down or lash out, not stand tall and reveal a truth that no insult could overshadow. But Marcus wasn't finished. His voice grew steadier, more powerful with every word, as though each syllable was fueled by history itself. "You tell me to go back to Africa," he said, staring directly at her. "But when this country needed me, I didn't run. I didn't hide. I stood up. I fought for it. And I'd do it again. Because this is my home. My ancestors built this land with their sweat and blood long before you ever stepped into this park." A hush swept through the crowd. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that made people realize they were witnessing something unforgettable. For a moment, no one moved. The woman opened her mouth, searching for a reply, but nothing came out. Her lips trembled, her bravado crumbling in front of dozens of strangers who now stood united, not with her, but against the hate she had tried to spread. Marcus let the silence hang. He didn't rush. He wanted his words to sink in, to echo in every corner of that park. His calm confidence radiated like a shield, making it impossible to ignore the truth in what he was saying. Then he delivered the final blow, his voice strong and unshakable. "So, if anyone here should be questioning loyalty to this country, it's not me. It's the person who tries to divide it." The reaction was explosive. The crowd broke into thunderous applause, louder than anything that had been heard in the park that day. People cheered, clapped, and even shouted words of encouragement. A mother lifted her child onto her shoulders so he could see the man who had just silenced hate with dignity. A group of teenagers pumped their fists and yelled, "Respect!" The woman, overwhelmed by the tidal wave of support for Marcus, took a step back. Her earlier arrogance was gone. She glanced around desperately, but the faces staring back at her were not sympathetic. They were firm, united, and unyielding. She tried once more to speak, her voice trembling. I didn't mean," she stammered. But the words were swallowed by the roar of applause. No one was listening anymore. The power of the moment had shifted completely, and she knew she had lost. Finally, with her shoulders slumped and her eyes cast downward, she turned and hurried away, disappearing into the crowd she had once thought would support her. But now, she was just a figure of shame, forgotten as soon as she left. Marcus remained where he was, not triumphant, not boastful, but dignified. He didn't chase after her. He didn't need to. The truth had already won. The respect pouring from the crowd was louder than any insult she could ever throw. People began approaching him, shaking his hand, thanking him for his service. One elderly man with tears in his eyes gripped Marcus's shoulder and whispered, "You reminded us all what it means to be American." Others echoed the same gratitude, their admiration written across their faces. The applause slowly died down, but the atmosphere remained charged. What had started as a moment of cruelty had transformed into a lesson everyone in that park would carry with them. Marcus hadn't just defended himself. He had reminded every witness that strength isn't always about fighting back with fists or rage. Sometimes, real strength is about standing tall, speaking truth, and refusing to let hate have the final word. As Marcus finally turned back toward the food truck, a young boy tugged at his father's sleeve and asked, "Dad, is he a hero?" His father nodded without hesitation. "Yes, son, he is. Not just because he wore the uniform, but because he showed us all today how real courage looks." And so the moment lingered. People left the park with more than just memories of a sunny afternoon. They left carrying the weight of Marcus's words, the inspiration of his calm defiance, and the reminder that dignity and truth will always outshine ignorance. The atmosphere completely changed. Just moments earlier, the park had been filled with tension, the kind that makes your stomach twist and your heart beat faster. People weren't sure how things would end, whether it would erupt into an ugly confrontation or leave everyone shaken. But now, the fear was gone. In its place was something stronger, something unifying. People began cheering, clapping, their voices rising together in support. What had started as whispers and murmurs quickly turned into a roar of approval. Strangers who hadn't spoken to each other all day were suddenly united in one voice, standing behind Marcus. "Thank you for your service," one man shouted, his voice breaking with emotion. Others echoed the same words. Children, who had been shielded by their parents just minutes earlier, peeked out with wide eyes, watching the scene unfold. They saw not just a man, but an example of courage standing in front of them. People reached out to shake Marcus's hand, some patting him on the back, others simply offering a nod of respect. His calm dignity shone brighter than the hate that had been hurled at him, and in that moment, everyone could see the difference between anger and strength. The woman who had started it all stood frozen, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. The power she thought she held had vanished, replaced by the crushing weight of her own words. She tried to defend herself, her voice breaking. I didn't mean it like that," she stammered weakly, her eyes darting around, searching for someone, anyone, to take her side. But nobody responded. Nobody wanted to hear her excuses. The same crowd that had once stood silently as she shouted now turned their backs on her words. People weren't just ignoring her, they were rejecting her. For the first time, the woman realized she was alone. The crowd wasn't on her side. The strength she thought she had wasn't real. It had only lived in the silence of others. Now, with voices raised in support of Marcus, her hate looked small, pitiful, and powerless. Her voice grew quieter with every attempt to explain, until it was little more than a whisper lost beneath the wave of cheers and applause. Her face burned with shame. Her shoulders sagged. Finally, unable to stand against the tide of truth any longer, she turned. Her steps were slow, heavy. She walked away with her head down, her shoulders hunched, her anger replaced with the unmistakable weight of humiliation. Marcus didn't move. He didn't chase after her. He didn't throw insults back at her. He simply stood tall, silent now, letting the truth linger in the air. Because he understood something most people forget. Sometimes the most powerful response is not anger, but calm strength. And the crowd saw it. They felt it. They understood it. A man standing near the front whispered to his wife, "That's real courage right there." His wife nodded, squeezing his hand tightly, her eyes glistening with tears. Another person, a young college student recording on her phone, spoke softly into the camera. "I'll never forget this. This is what it means to fight hate with dignity." Parents pointed Marcus out to their children, telling them, "Remember this moment. This is how you stand tall." The kids, wide-eyed and curious, nodded, absorbing a lesson that no textbook could ever teach them. The park, once tense and divided, now felt different, almost peaceful. Strangers who had come for a simple afternoon of food and sunshine had witnessed something far greater. They had seen with their own eyes that hate can be silenced, not by shouting louder, but by refusing to bow to it. Marcus finally moved, but only to shake more hands offered to him. His face remained calm, his presence steady. He didn't smile arrogantly or act as if he had won a battle. Instead, he stood with quiet dignity, as if to say that the truth had always been enough. And it was. In that moment, the entire park had witnessed something powerful. They had seen that words fueled by hate could crumble when faced with dignity and truth. They had seen ignorance defeated, not by fists or rage, but by composure and strength of character. The memory of the woman's hate would fade, but the memory of Marcus's response would last. Because in a world where too many voices try to divide, one man had reminded them all that unity, courage, and truth are far stronger. That day, people didn't just leave with their meals and their families. They left with a story to tell, a lesson to carry, and an image they would never forget. A man standing tall in the face of hate, proving that dignity can silence ignorance. Later that day, the park was quieter. The food trucks had packed up, families had headed home, and the summer sun was beginning to set. But one thing lingered in the air, the memory of what had happened. People were still talking, still processing. What they had witnessed. It wasn't just another argument in a public place. It was something different, something unforgettable. Some called it the most inspiring thing they had ever seen play out before their eyes. Strangers who had never spoken to one another found themselves discussing Marcus's words. They replayed. The moment when his calm voice rose above hate, when his truth left the crowd breathless. A man in his 50s admitted quietly to his wife, "I wanted to say something, but I froze. I was afraid to step in. Watching him handle it like that, it gave me hope." Others shared the story with friends and family who hadn't been there, describing every detail, how the woman's voice had shaken with anger, how Marcus had stood tall, how the atmosphere had shifted from fear to unity in a matter of seconds. By evening, the story had begun spreading beyond the park. Social media posts captured the applause, the cheers, and Marcus's powerful words. But perhaps the most touching moment came from a child. A young boy tugged on his father's hand and looked up at him with wide, thoughtful eyes. "Dad," he asked softly, "is that man a hero?" The father didn't hesitate. He knelt down so he could meet his son's gaze and said, "Yes, son, he is. Not just because he fought for our country in uniform, but because he fought hate with truth. That takes a different kind of courage. And you saw it today." The boy nodded slowly, as if tucking that lesson deep into his memory. For him, Marcus wasn't just a stranger at the park anymore. He had become a symbol of what it meant to be strong without shouting, brave without anger, and proud without arrogance. What made the moment even more powerful was that Marcus hadn't planned for it. He didn't wake up that morning expecting to be anyone's example. He wasn't trying to make a statement, win an argument, or change the world. He was simply waiting for lunch like everyone else. But when hate tried to rise up and take center stage, Marcus refused to let it. He didn't return anger with more anger. He didn't humiliate or threaten. Instead, he did something far greater. He stood his ground with strength, truth, and dignity. That choice is what made the difference. That's why the crowd would never forget his words. Because sometimes the loudest response doesn't come from shouting louder than your opponent. It doesn't come from exchanging insults or proving who can be crueler. The loudest response comes from standing tall when others expect you to fall. It comes from speaking truth in the face of lies. And it comes from showing that ignorance has no real power when it is met with calm, unshakable dignity. Marcus didn't just defend himself that day. He gave everyone watching a lesson in strength, in patience, and in what true pride looks like. He reminded people that being American isn't about the color of your skin or where your ancestors came from. It's about the values you live by, the sacrifices you make, and the way you treat others. The people who left the park that day carried more than just their leftover meals or memories of a sunny afternoon. They carried a story they would retell for weeks, months, maybe even years. A story about how one man reminded an entire crowd of what it truly means to belong. Not by proving himself, but by refusing to let hate define him. And as the sun dipped, lower and the park lights flickered on, the weight of that truth lingered. Marcus had walked away quietly, without fanfare, without demanding recognition. But in the silence he left behind, he gave people something more powerful than any argument could ever provide: perspective. That day, Marcus didn't just remind one angry woman of her ignorance. He reminded everyone watching of what it truly means to be American. Because in the end, America is not built on division. It's built on resilience. It's not built on hate. It's built on courage. And sometimes the greatest acts of patriotism don't happen on a battlefield or in a courtroom. They happen in ordinary places, like a park on a summer afternoon, when one person decides that dignity will always speak louder than hate. And that's the moment no one would ever forget. And that's the moment no one would ever forget. Because, in the end, America is not built on division. It's built on resilience. It's not built on hate. It's built on courage. And sometimes, the greatest acts of patriotism don't happen on a battlefield or in a courtroom. They happen in ordinary places, like a park on a summer afternoon, when one person decides that dignity will always speak louder than hate. And if this story inspired you, make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Because sometimes the right story can change the way we see the world.